Everybody, welcome back. I'm going to start doing this a little bit more often. This is an opportunity to talk about a lot of my subscribers and students that I've talked to and people that follow me. I've had a lot of questions about my job and kind of what I do. So it's an opportunity for people to start asking questions. Start doing this a little bit more often on my drives. My drive for the next, for the rest of the year is probably going to be, an hour and a half, 2 hours or so, one way. So, staying in a hotel the next couple days, but now's the opportunity to ask questions. Welding questions, whatever you name it. Bailey, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, question for pipeline welding. Go for it. That's my forte. What's your question? Does fabrication on plant work need specific tickets? Okay, what do you mean by tickets? I don't know if you're in a different country, but for us, if you're saying tickets, to us that would mean either a maintenance order or a permit. So what do you mean by tickets? And I can try and explain. Jesus Christ, dude. Oh, testing for welders before work starts. There's a lot. So I have some follow-up questions for that. The plant work. By plant work, do you mean like a refinery, or by plant work, do you mean in like a tank farm or a compressor station? Or something like that? Or is this like a nuclear facility? Or can you give me a specific example? Because there's going to be different answers. Testing welders before work starts. Tank farm. Okay. So the short answer is typically yes. Every company, now I'm talking about the United States, and I'm talking about company specific work. If you are a contractor and you are, say your company won a bid, or you're a union welder and where you're going, they want a bid for a company, you have to weld test for, oh, that helps, you're in Canada. Okay, this should be the same thing. I would double check this. Don't ever take my word as the gospel or law, but I believe Canada follows very similar rules to what we do for the most part. And basically in the pipeline or any oil and gas company, you have to test for every company before you start work. So if I go to work for ExxonMobil, I have to take ExxonMobil's test. If I go to work for BP, I got to take BP's test. They won't accept each other's for the most part. Sometimes you can get exceptions, but realistically, you have to test for every company. Now, once you get that qualification from the company, you should be good to weld for whatever you tested for the entire company anyway, as long as it follows the weld procedure that you tested to. So that's the best answer I can give you. Like I said, every situation is different, so you want to check everything, but I can tell you in my experience, for every company I've ever welded for or inspected for, I've had to test for every single company I've worked for. Sometimes some companies require you to test even if you leave for a while. Some companies don't. It depends. But typically, yes, you have to test welders before you start work if they haven't worked for the company in a recent past, usually within 6 months. First job was a welder? That's awesome. What did you weld? Who did you work for? Or if you don't want to say the company, like what industry? No problem. Fun fact about welding in space, did you know you actually don't need to use heat for a welding process? If you're in the vacuum of space, and they do practice this, you can literally push the material together and it'll fuse itself. And the reason for that is because in the vacuum of space, theoretically speaking, there is nothing in the way between the atoms of the materials. So if you take two similar materials, have them, clean off the surfaces, there's nothing in the way for the atoms, and the atoms will literally kind of push in between each other and fuse themselves. Airplane motor cycle header pipes. Airplane parts, motorcycle header pipes. Okay, that's pretty cool. I dabble with a little bit of that in my own shop in my garage. Every once in a while somebody will ask me to do something. Hell, I make motorcycle handlebars for my bike specifically, because the motorcycle that I have, there's not a real aftermarket support for it anymore because it's discontinued, and the biggest thing about them is handlebars. I'm a very large person, I'm 6'4", so finding handlebars that fit me without them being 8 hangers is tough. So I made handlebars for my bike, put them online, and basically just said, if anybody wants them, I will make them for you. And I've actually had, since I put them up, probably 25 orders for them. So Anthony, did you work for yourself or did you work for a company? And was it like repair or custom work? Okay, so was it repair work or maintenance, or was it like custom, like custom headers or frame extensions and stuff like that? Yeah, inspectors do get a lot of pushback in the industry, and I'll be honest, the biggest reason why is because inspectors aren't welders, and welders get, they're protective of their work. You know, I was a welder myself for 15 years, and when you have an inspector coming up, and I've had inspectors come up to me as I'm welding and tell me that I am doing it wrong, which is astonishing to me because they're not the ones welding it, and if my welds are passing, then I don't understand what the problem is. Now, me as an inspector, I'm not one to come up to a welder and tell them they're doing it wrong. I choose my words very carefully because I know how it is. I know that especially when I was a pipe welder. Now, granted, I was a younger kid and I thought I was untouchable. I'll admit my mistakes. And when somebody would come up to me and tell me that I'm doing something wrong and try to help me, I would push them off and tell them basically to leave me alone in a not so nice way. So I can understand a welder not liking inspectors and getting pushback from the inspectors, especially when they see something in the weld and say it needs to fix, and a welder will tell me that it's passed before in other places, doesn't understand why it's bothering me. And the interpretation of the code is up to the inspector. So some inspectors have different interpretations. When I am inspecting welds, I am to the book. Now that works both ways. So if I'm allowed, say, a 1/4 inch long of undercut, 1/16 of an inch deep, I hold them to that. But at the same time, if it is exactly a 1/4 of an inch long and exactly a 1/16 of an inch deep, according to the code, it passes. So it can work both ways for the welder. Some people are really strict and just don't want to see any of it, and some others are really lenient and let some things slip. I don't let things slip because that can come back on me, not only professionally but also personally. I can become personally liable if that weld fails. So I get why welders push back, but I also understand the inspectors have a lot of responsibility on their plate that a lot of people don't realize. So Anthony, you did custom and maintenance. That's pretty cool. That's fun to do. Well, Andrea, in my personal belief, and a lot of people believe this too, my personal belief, and I'm talking specifically the pipeline industry, I do believe to be a really good welding inspector, you should have welding experience. I'm not saying you have to be the world's greatest welder. Matter of fact, I know some guys that are inspectors now that tried pipe welding and just weren't very good at it, and they knew that, so they moved into inspecting. They know the industry. They know how it works. They know how welding works. They have some experience to go off of, but welding's not for them. For me, I don't like to toot my own horn too much, but I was pretty good at it. I just didn't want to do it my entire career all the time. I like keeping welding as my kind of side gig to keep going and doing this stuff for people, because I learned pretty quickly that guys that want to get into welding, a lot of the older guys that are looking to retire, they're kind of protective of their secrets. I understand why. I definitely understand why, but at the same time, we need to teach the younger generation about this stuff so we can get more, because we are at such a deficit of welders in the industry that we're literally headhunting for them. And mark my words, 2026, at least on the East Coast, Marcellus Shale, oil refineries, and ports and pipeline facilities, they're going to be hurting for welders so bad that they'll be willing to pay a lot more than what they have been to get guys, and they already get a lot of money. Yeah, inspectors do have a lot of responsibility to sign off on. It's as soon as we sign off on something, that responsibility comes almost directly onto us. pipeline welding is like welding on an assembly line. It kind of is. You know, especially when you get main line and you're on a firing line. Yeah. It's essentially what it is. Went to a couple schools for welding training. It's good to go and get some experience. Now, I worked at a school for a year to become a welding instructor, and I honestly loved the job. I'm still in contact with all the guys. As a matter of fact, the guys that are on the podcast with me, they are welding instructors that I worked with, and we hit it off pretty quick. I swear to God, I love that job, and if it wasn't for the fact that I'm getting paid a lot more to do what I'm doing now, I'd probably still be at the school. Tie-ins are fun. Tie-ins are my favorite days. I can tell you this, as an inspector myself, my favorite projects that I get onto are tie-ins and what we call pig digs or anomaly digs. Those are my favorite. And my company loves me for it because everybody else hates them. But it's been my specialty for 15 years to do anomaly digs. That's the majority of what I did. Pipeline companies would call the company that I worked for, and they would call us out for emergency digs because we would respond right away. We were a small non-union shop that took care of a lot of work, and myself and the other welder that was with me, we were really good at it. And as much as I like structure and doing the same thing every day so I know what to expect, I also like the excitement of the unknown, because you're digging down to that pipe. All we know is that the pig told us that something's wrong, whether it's interior corrosion or delamination or whatever, and we're going down to see, okay, what can we see and how do we fix it? And it's usually when we get to that point, it's an emergency without being critical. Because there's no, typically, now I've been on a couple of leaks, but typically, at least in the oil industry, when we're doing anomaly digs, there is no leak. I have never, in my 15 years, come across an active leak while digging up an anomaly dig for oil. Natural gas is a different story. There's been plenty of times where I've dug up natural gas lines and the damage or the corrosion ends up being way worse than what we thought. It's amazing. But yeah, now I'm not on anomaly digs right now. Right now I'm doing some fabrication stuff. We're running 2 new lines to reroute this pipeline. Not my favorite work in the world. It's okay, but I'd rather be on the anomaly digs in the middle of nowhere, or even, pump stations, valve raisings, stuff like that. I like doing that. I like doing the big stuff. I basically like the stuff that nobody else does. Because everybody I talk to, they want to be in the terminals and the facilities because it's clean. You know where you're going every day. Everything's above ground. All that sorts of stuff. I'm more of a guy that I want to get a phone call and say, you need to be up in the middle of mountains in the middle of nowhere, and we don't know what we're going to find out. And then I go up there with the crew. They tell me what their plan is. I'm evaluating, talking to my company, and relaying the information and coming up with a plan together. That's kind of more of my stuff. I'm also a DOT inspector too, so that helps a lot. Now, the one thing I will say about going back to a good CWI needs to be a welder first. I don't believe that holds true in the structure and the bridge fabrication industry, and there's a specific reason for that, because that's my first job as a welding inspector was actually doing bridge fabrication inspection, and I would say 75% of that job is coatings and checking materials. Only 25% at the most is the actual welding part. So, and as far as a CWI, a third-party CWI, let's make that clear. Quality assurance, quality control are two different things. So on the quality assurance side, for bridge and structural, you're checking to make sure everything meets the code. You're making sure that weld parameters are set. Now, it does help to know a thing or two about welding, but for the most part, being a experienced welder, it doesn't necessarily directly help. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help. Anthony, you've been a truck driver for 24 years. So what made you change from welding to truck driving? I'm curious. Off topic, but can we have a little swivel for the boys? I mean, there's not really much to see. Give me a second, I can try. Went through the newspaper and couldn't find one welding job and didn't look back. That sucks. So, can you give me an idea on what area you're in? Or what area you were in at the time? Because, I mean, 24, 25 years, yeah, I can see how that would, 25 years ago, as far as welding, wasn't the same as what it is now. So I could see that happening. Oh, well, that explains a lot. Okay. Yeah, Southern California 25 years ago, if you were to weld, you would probably have to travel a decent amount. I'm sorry to hear that. That sucks. I believe that, though. Because at that time we weren't hurting for welders near as much. They weren't paying near as much unless you're in the pipeline industry, and that seems to be hold true for all areas. But at the same time, pipeline guys, we travel a lot. So unless you're looking to, move around, a pipeline industry may not be for you. And it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. I don't even travel near as much as what these third-party guys do. I work for the company that I would inspect for, and they keep me as close to home as they can while still keeping me busy. So, I really can't complain considering the position that I'm in. But, I travel a lot. Hell, I was gone this summer. I was gone the entire summer. I'd come home during the weekends and, Saturday evening, I'd be home for one day with the kids, and then I'd go back up. Now, of course, it's the end of the year, so, this company, along with just about every other oil company, is trying to spend their money that they saved up for emergency so they can keep the same budget for next year. Because if they don't use their budget money, they lose it. So they're trying to spend as much as they can, and then all these jobs pop up at the end of the year. It sucks, but I understand it at a business point of view. But real question, can closed hydraulic systems like shock absorbers be welded without affecting the oil and seals? Zach, the short answer is yes. The short answer is yes, it is possible. Now, the only time you can do that is if you have the correct wall thickness. So if you have enough wall thickness and you have, there's going to be a lot of controls involved. You have to make sure the pressure is down to a certain level depending on the wall thicknesses, stuff like that. For example, oil pipelines or gas pipelines. In order to fix the steel, so if we come up, and this goes back to the anomaly digs, when we dig up something and we find, I'll just say, a small cluster of pitting on the pipeline that needs to be repaired. We don't shut that line down. We weld on it. What we'll do is we'll put on a repair sleeve, which is basically two pieces of sleeve material. Is like, think of it as like two halves of a piece of pipe that'll fit over and then another piece of pipe. So it's called a reinforcing sleeve, or a we call it a B sleeve. And what we do is we'll weld the seams together to create one piece, so it, you know, seals the line. But then we'll also weld the ends to the carrier pipe, so it, you know, when that fails, it'll encase the leak into that pipe, and essentially that casing or that reinforcement sleeve becomes the pipe, and that is a permanent fix. So yes, you can. There's just a lot of controls and measures that you have to take to make sure it's safe. Understand why they do it, but that is not. Justin, I certainly agree with you. I believe the same thing. If you're gonna spread work out, you need to spread it out. Waiting until the last couple months to get everything done, there's consequences. The first consequence is you've got a bunch of guys rushing to get a job done by the end of the year, and the quality may not be as good as it could be. The other problem you have too is, what if you're waiting and then, you know, you can't get it done, or if it's a repair while you're waiting, what if it starts leaking? That's a big problem. Now we have different, when we talk about corrosion or anomaly digs, they're ranked based on severity to determine when they need to dig them up. And it's not a foolproof method. You know, anything can happen in that time. So if something's ranked as severe, or whatever classification the company uses, we dig it up right away. If it's ranked a little less, then it's, you know, not as emergent. You know, it depends on its ranking system, but you know, there's the possibility that, say we find, my biggest one is lamination on the pipe. So what happens when the pipe starts laminating or delaminating is when the seam of the pipe starts peeling apart. And unfortunately, it's a common occurrence on older stuff. We see a lot of it. And if they look at it and they look at the pig data and they determine that it's not that big of a deal, it's only one small spot, we can wait. In that time, it could split apart quicker. Or it could totally split apart, and when you dig it up, you've got a leaking line. When you have a leaking line, especially with liquids, it's no longer something that you can do while it's in service. You have to shut it down and cut it apart and fix it, and that costs a lot of money. Welding sucks. Been welding 40 years now and burnt out. Well, 40 years of welding will do that. Unfortunately, there's no nice way to put it. It's just is what it is, and that was my fear, is that I welded for 15 years professionally, full-time, and I loved doing it, but my fear was getting to that point where I hated it. I don't want to hate it. I never want to hate it. Paid the bills though. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, the money's there. That's why, hell, the pipe welders that I've been watching on this project that I'm on, these guys are 65 and 72 years old. Been welding 40 plus years. Now they still love it. That's the only reason why they're still doing it, is because they still love it. And the one guy even told me he's afraid to retire because he's seen too many welders retire and then not last much longer. Do you do any NDT? When I test welders, I do. So the only NDT I am qualified to do at the moment is visual inspection and destructive testing. I am not qualified to do any non-destructive testing unless it's for informational purposes. So I will do some dye penetrant and mag particle if I need some information on an anomaly, but I can't submit any paperwork. I can't sign anything as far as that. The only thing that I'm allowed to do is destructively test for weld tests. That's it. Now I am working on becoming NDT qualified for a bunch of different things, more because I just want to, I don't have to. But Joy Mining Company? Yeah, that sounds like a tough one. Yeah, eddy current is an interesting one. I got to learn more about it. I don't know much about eddy current, but I want to get I'm going to submit my paperwork to get VT qualified through ASNT, because you can, as a CWI, you can do that. I also want to get my PT and MT, and then I would like to work on my UT, because that would be the most useful to me. I'm honestly not that interested in getting qualified for X-ray. It would be useful, but I don't have much of an interest in it. Plus, it takes a lot of time, a lot of studying, and it's just overall just a lot of work. All right, Scott, thanks for joining in. What industry am I in? So I am a pipeline inspector. So I inspect pipeline and tank work for my company. I've done a bunch of different things. I've done D15 and D11 inspection. I've also been a pipe welder for 15 years. So, but pipeline's my thing. Aviation. Yeah, you guys do have to do a lot of NDT, a lot of ultrasound, and a lot of dye pen. Matter of fact, I'm studying. I have to get the one qualification that I am required to get, that I need to get. I have to test for it next month. I have to study for it. My API 1169 certification, which is pipeline related stuff. I have to be qualified for it in order to do anomaly digs. Do I travel a lot for work? Yes. I get lucky because I work for the company that I inspect for, so I am their employee. I'm not third party. So they keep me as close as they can, usually within driving distance, but I am out 100% of the time. My office is at home. So I have a home office, but for lack of a better word, I live in my truck. Now, I live in a good spot. I'm central to a lot of our main facilities and productive pipelines. So a lot of the work that I get involved in is within 2 hours of me, which to me is driving distance. Do I still get my hands dirty? Do I still get my hands dirty? Probably not in the sense that you're thinking of. So as an inspector, I am not allowed to turn a wrench. period. That is not a liability that I want to take on. That is the job of the contractor, and that is also not something that is an inspector's job. My job is to make sure they are doing things properly. Now, do I still get dirty? Yeah. I'm not one to sit in my truck, look from the window to see if the weld looks good. I know inspectors that do that. I will climb down in the ditch, no matter if it's filled with water or not, and look around the weld and sign off on it. I'm not afraid to get dirty, but as far as actually like getting my hands dirty and doing work, not really. State Street. Wasn't too bad of a drive, actually. What is the average diameter of these pipes? The average diameter? Good God. They range very widely. It could be anything from 4-inch pipe to 48-inch pipe. The majority of the main lines that are in the ground, at least that I work on, are 20 and 24-inch pipe that are main line. But when you get into a facility in the tank farms and stuff, those lines usually don't exceed 12-inch unless it's a main tank, and then you get up into 20. But yeah, coming up with an average wouldn't explain very well the sizes of them, because they range so widely. Is 40-inch pipe like an all-day thing to weld? Actually, it's not. So for API 1104, which is the pipeline code that we adhere to for main lines or transmission lines, any pipe that is 12-inch in diameter and above, you need 2 welders, one on each side, that need to weld at the same time. When you get above, I think if I remember right, 36-inch pipe, you need at least 3 welders, and typically they don't put 3, they put 4. And then anything above 48-inch pipe, you need 4. So as far as welding all day, no, 40-inch pipe shouldn't take all day. 40-inch pipe for 2 welders or 4 welders, typically 4 welders, that would be 2 hours. The tank alarm going off. Yep. That's a tank alarm. That means tank's overfilling or getting too high. Oh, they're checking on it right now. That's not my facility though. Not bad at all. I assume there's leak and pressure checks after welding. Yes, so you have, after they weld pipe, it has to be non-destructively tested. Most of the time in the pipeline industry, that means x-ray. So the welds will be x-ray. Now before that, you got a visual inspection. That's what I do. So I go in, I do a visual inspection on the weld to make sure everything from the surface looks the way it's supposed to. There's no defects or discontinuities that I can find that they need to fix. And then x-ray comes in, x-rays the weld, and they can see any anomalies that are inside the weld that I can't. And they will determine whether it needs to repair the weld, or they need to cut it out, or if it's good. After that, after the project's all done, then they will do a pressure test on the fabrication. And usually that pressure test is up to, at least for what we do, about 95, somewhere between 90 and 92% of the maximum allowable pressure on the pipe. Not the maximum operating pressure, the maximum pressure possible. So if the pipe is certified, or if the pipe is, certified by the manufacturer to withstand, we'll pick a number of 2,000 PSI. We'll test it to 90-ish% of that, somewhere around 1900, or about 1900 PSI, to make sure that it doesn't, fail. And then that would certify it to run a maximum of 1100 PSI. Any tools to aid you in your visual inspection, such as magnifying glass? So funny thing, in the inspection industry, a lot of, when you go to welding schools, they will say one of the tools that we use is a magnifying glass. That is only partially true. As far as a magnifying glass goes, we are not allowed to use a magnifying glass. And the reason is that if I need a magnifying glass to find a defect, then chances are that defect is more than acceptable, according to the pipeline code, because you're allowed so much of all discontinuities because no weld is perfect. For example, on a pipeline weld, you're allowed a 1/16 of an inch of undercut every 2 inches of linear weld. So if I need a magnifying glass to find undercut, then the undercut's going to be acceptable. Now, we have specific tools to measure stuff like that maybe I'll do a video explaining some of the inspection tools that we use. So we do have like a VWAC gauge, which will measure undercut and underfill or overfill. There is this thing called a bridge cam, which is what I use a lot, and it has a multitude of different tools on it to use to weld check. And there's a couple of high-low gauges. We use voltmeters a lot to make sure that the welding machines that the welders are using are putting out the appropriate amperage, things like that. But as far as a magnifying glass specifically, the only time I would ever use a magnifying glass if I suspect a crack. Because even though, and it's crazy to even say this, even though the API 1104 codebook does allow certain cracks at a certain amount, almost every company I've ever worked for does not allow cracks to any extent. So if I suspect there's a crack, yes, I will break out a magnifying glass to make sure there's a crack, but I will not use the magnifying glass for the initial visual inspection. And if I have to break it out, I will tell the welder what I'm looking at, because the last thing I need is for him to go back on me, tell somebody that I'm using a magnifying glass to inspect his weld. And when that's not the case, I'm searching for a crack. Long answer, but that's what I got. No problem, I appreciate it. Honestly, the only reason why I'm able to answer these questions so well is, I don't know if it's so much the knowledge, it's because a lot of these questions I've been asked many times before, and in my past, I've had to look them up because somebody will ask me and I'll be like, well, you know what? I don't know. Let me look it up. And then I remember those answers because people ask me them a lot. Now, I've also been a welding educator and I've been in the welding industry for a while. So, of course, I'm going to have all these answers memorized at this point, especially as a welding instructor, because you get the same questions over and over again. And I like it. I enjoy it. So please ask any question you want to know and I'll give you all the best answer that I can. I'm going to park. I'll stay on here for a minute while I get some stuff together. Only semi-confident make. Well, that's all right. A little bit of practice goes a long way. Oh. here. I just need to find my work phone. There it is. But yeah, aviation industry, there's not a ton of welding, mostly because they don't want to risk having a weld crack in the air. So a lot of the stuff is bolted and riveted together so it can flex and move around a little bit better. Make sure I got everything. Oh. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's time for me to actually get to work and get these guys started. Well, thank you, everybody. But if those are damaged, we send it off for repair. Yeah, you'll have specialists that work on specific things because they do it all the time. We do the same thing. Especially when it comes like for us. We'll send valves out to get repaired, even though we know how to repair them, and I've fixed valves myself and, you know, welded gates and stuff like that. We'll let the manufacturer do it. Give them the liability. All right. Well, that's it for me. I got to get off. Thank you, everybody, for participating. That makes my drive a lot easier. I'm glad I could answer some questions. Stay tuned for more. I'm going to start doing a little bit more of this, especially since my drives have been, you know, longer than an hour. So keeps the day going. But thanks for watching. Maybe I'll start doing some inspection videos to show some tools and stuff. And I'll see you later.